everyone. Welcome to another episode of Hyperbolic Orbits podcast. As promised, this podcast presents to you real life space professionals who have walked the path before you and who are here to show you how you can move forward. Today we have, and I'm really honored to have, Kirsten Whittingham from Max Space. She's currently the president at Max Space, a company that is making expandable space habitats. A personal interest of mine, as well as a really growing and technically complex field. So we have a lot to learn today. Thank you, Kirsten, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
Thank you. The first question I would really like to ask is, how did you begin? What was your education like, and how did you begin in the aerospace industry?
I like to tell people, and people who might have ever heard of their podcasts from me, I say that the story starts when I was 3, but don't worry, it goes fast. I was really young, and at some point I told a family member of mine that I wanted to have my face painted like an astronaut. We were at a fair or something, and she would tell me this story later. I was so young, obviously I don't remember this, but she would tell me this story later and say I knew from that moment on that she would work in the space field because you've always been very persistent. And she just knew I was locked in. So, and she was right. When I grew up, I was around a lot of kids who wanted to be firefighters and superheroes. You don't always know when you're young, but those are the things that people gravitate towards. And for me, it was always, I want to be an astronaut. So I was able to go to space camp when I was in 6th grade. Space camp in Huntsville, Alabama, very close to where I grew up. It's a sleepaway camp for those who don't know. And in that environment at the time, we did a space shuttle mission simulation. So you're in this group of people that you're always around at camp. They're sort of your pod, and half of them got to be astronauts on the shuttle, and half of them were flight controllers at mission control. And of course, I'm like, ooh, let me on. I want to be the astronaut. But I got assigned to be at mission control. And that's when I realized what mission control is, what they do. And I thought that's actually what I wanted to be. Because I didn't have any words. When you're so young, you just know, hey, I really think space is cool. I had a telescope. I was, doing some like low-level astronomy stuff. Everything about space was cool for me. But understanding what mission control is about, making sure that mission is successful, making decisions, keeping the astronauts safe, that's what I wanted to do. So at that point, I was like, well, what do I major in? I don't know, because at the time, astronauts, they were sort of recommending that you might be a geology expert, or maybe you were a doctor or that type of thing. So it wasn't even engineering. They wanted to have some skill sets that could be useful to them for exploration purposes. But people around me were like, I think engineering is the right way for you to go. So aerospace engineering, I was probably 12 years old when I picked out my degree program. I was pretty young. Never thought about doing anything else. I was lucky. I went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, where they have an aerospace engineering program. They recruited me. I didn't know about them. This is sort of pre-internet or very early days of internet. So you kind of have to know people or just know, right? But they had called me and recruited me, and I thought, no, this is where I want to go. Everybody would be kind of in the same field or interested in the same thing. And it's a small university. They have an aerospace engineering degree. So that's where I want to go. So that's how I got that degree.
That's really nice. Now, when you say mission control, I mean, what we watch in movies, surely exciting. But if we think about it, it is a high stress, highly technical job. So can you share your experience of what it was like?
Yeah, it is high stress, but it's also sometimes incredibly boring. So when you're training, and you train all the time, right? So you have to get certified, and that's a long period of training, maybe about 18 months. It sort of depends. But when you're training, you're doing all these simulations, just like I did at Space Camp. And in those simulations, the instructors are intentionally setting everything up for failure. So by the end of this 9-hour shift that you have, the entire thing is going to be falling apart, whether that's the shuttle or the space station or whatever you're working on. It's on fire. The astronauts can't breathe. Everything that can go wrong is going wrong. So you're stressed out. Like, you start off kind of slow. A sensor will fail, a fan will fail, but it builds. And by the end, you're just like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. But thankfully, that's not how most of your shifts actually are. You go on console, especially if you're working space station, which is very nominal operations at this point. You go on, you do your thing. That doesn't mean that you can't have shifts where there aren't really interesting things that happen, but I would definitely say I was much more stressed out in the training environment than the normal mission operations environment, which is great. I mean, they want you to go on console and just have everything under control and be able to work through any problems. But, you know, I would also say I didn't realize setting out to be a flight controller that it's rotating shifts and what that would mean, and the fact that you're working holidays, that you're working weekends. So it's not necessarily something that most people want to do for a really long time. They'll do it for a period of time and then say, okay, I've experienced this. I kind of did what I set out to do, but now it's time to not have all this craziness about my job.
That still sounds really exciting, you know. And if I ask you that you have evolved into various different kinds of roles in the space industry, you have a lot of experience. So having that engineering, that technical background, how did you help? How did it help you? Because ultimately, these are all highly technical companies that you worked at.
Right. And it's interesting. I joke with people, I've never designed anything, right? So I have this aerospace engineering degree. You would think that I have gone off and designed parts or components or something, but I've never touched design, which is probably a good thing. I was not very good at computer-aided design in college. I only passed that class because I had a friend that was partnered with me. But I think the technical degree has been important in my career to be able to bridge the gap between my company and generally a customer. That's not true of the NASA work that I did, but other work that I have done has been the company knows what they're doing. They're designing maybe a jet engine, or they're designing, or they have a test facility that they're running. And now you have to go work with a customer and try to help them integrate with you or understand how to use the product that you have. And those customers are generally very technical themselves, but they're just not embedded in the organization. So they don't have all that same information. So being able to translate in a technical way, like I still have to be technical. Like I said, the customers themselves are still technical. I can't just come in and use plain English. But I don't have to design anything. I can just sit with the engineers, understand their perspective, and then take that and translate it over to customers or partners or whoever.
That definitely helped. And that probably, I think, made it easier for your customers also to interact with you.
Yes, I think so. I remember when I started at Pratt Whitney, where I worked military jet engines for fighter aircraft. And I had never done that before, right? So I get there and I'm working with a lot of people who they have spent their entire careers working on jet engines. So they were very worried about my ability to come up to speed. And I had at the time one of our most technical customers. They're still very technical, but at the time I was assigned to them. And I think people were just very worried. They're like, okay, I mean, she seems great, but how is she going to be able to keep up with them? And it's brand new and she's learning. And there's always a ramp up period anytime you start a new job. So it took me a few months, but I think after that, I was like, no, I've got it. And I can work with them. And I had a great relationship with the customer. I still talk to my customer point of contact today over LinkedIn. So I think, having that ability to have that strong relationship, but also be able to come up to speed very quickly has helped me throughout my career.
It's wonderful to know. So from Pratt Whitney jet engines to this world of space stations, habitats, how has this come along, and what drew you towards this different side of space?
Right. So, again, I started off wanting to be a flight controller. I worked on the International Space Station as it was being constructed. I left NASA around the time that we completed construction of the baseline space station. So I went off in my career and did some other things, and then COVID hit. And I think that's true. We all kind of had a little bit of a midlife crisis of, am I living where I want to live? Am I working where I want to work? Am I accomplishing my life's objectives? I think we were all kind of at different points questioning things like that. And so for me, that was a chance for me to question, should I really be getting back into the space industry? It's changing a lot. There's a lot of startups that are sort of entering, and that has grown even in the past several years. But at the time, Axiom was announced as the first commercial space station. They had their contract with NASA, and I thought, well, this is really interesting. And I knew those names. Those names were people that I had worked with at NASA. So I just took a chance and applied and thought this could be a very interesting way of me using my customer program management background, especially with international governments, and this background that I have in space stations and spaceflight, and being able to merge those together. And that's exactly what I did at Axiom Space. I was able to bring together all of this experience I had and use it for driving that business forward.
That's really, really, really nice to know, because it sounds very dream like. It is sort of something we see in movies, but I think I don't know a little bit that space stations and habitats, especially the ones that you're working on now at Max Space, inflatable ones, are genuinely really, really difficult. So this podcast and in general, everything I do is meant to help people to start their careers in space. And I'm sure there was a lot to learn from this, what you told us today. But if I had to ask you that something practical, because a lot of people hear a lot of things, but to hear a real practical advice from you on how to really get started in this industry, anywhere they are, what would you say to them?
So the first thing, if I'm talking to somebody, especially that hasn't even picked out a degree, I would say, don't worry about the degree. Like, follow your heart. If you think you want to be an accountant, but you also like space, well, go be an accountant for a space company. Like, the space industry needs just about every discipline. They need doctors, they need lawyers, they need HR professionals, IT professionals. So if you have a calling that you feel very strongly about, and you just happen to also have this passion for space, I would just encourage you to follow that calling. You don't have to go be an engineer. As I have said, even though I have an engineering degree, I've never used that. I'm not actually designing parts. So I would just say, focus on what you think you're good about and that you're good at and that you're passionate about, and follow that. At the same time, figure out how you're going to network with these space companies and space professionals. Reach out to folks on LinkedIn, connect, be curious, ask questions for them. A lot of people will be very happy to respond to junior folks trying to figure out how to get their foot in the door. If you've got good questions, they'll be very happy to respond. So just think through those things. Think about whether or not you can go to conferences. Maybe you are at a university that has an aerospace engineering program. Well, go meet those students so that you can be connected to them in the future, so that you can follow along with their careers, and maybe they can open doors for you at certain companies. So I would just say, again, focus on what you're good at and network. I think networking is a huge piece of finding jobs in any industry. Was just texting with somebody this morning, and I'll share a little bit of that story. There's a huge hidden job market, which means that there are jobs that aren't posted. Maybe they're just not posted yet, right? They're thinking about how to post it and how to structure that job, the requirements and things. And if you are networking with that person right as they're writing that job posting, guess how that job posting could be written? It could be written just for you. Right? So having the networking and just knowing, having your name, your resume sort of on people's radars, sorry, can't talk this morning, is a great way of getting your foot in the door as well. You don't have to just rely on the advertised postings, some of which aren't even being filled, right? Like, they have it up there, but they're deciding whether or not they really need it. Maybe they have got layoffs are about to come. So I wouldn't just rely on those things. Network, meet people, be genuinely engaged with them, figure out how you can add value to them if possible. If you're super junior, I would just say have really great questions that you could ask them, where they feel like they are actually helping you and that they can share some experiences with you to help your career move along.
That's really precious advice, because we know that the commercial space companies have opened up the job market to a lot of people. It has made space accessible, honestly, to a lot of people. But still, more options sometimes means it gets difficult to navigate and find the right option.
That's right. And networking, I think, gives you not just advice on where the jobs are. I think it gives you insight into what companies are the best and the best for you, right? Because not everybody has the same values or whatever. So figuring out what matters to you, and then networking and asking questions about the company and the culture and the size and where they're headed, you can make better decisions about where to focus your efforts.
Thank you so much for this. And I would like to say that we have space professionals on this podcast, and the idea is to bring people from different fields. Like today, what you told us, we have not heard this before here. So thank you so much for doing this. Any last words you have for us? Advice? Anything you want to share?
Goodness. Yeah, I think I would just say to anybody who's interested in maybe even switching fields, again, the advice is a little bit similar, right? Maybe you've been in the automotive industry or the computer programming industry. It's network. It is find people that can help connect you to the right jobs, but recognizing that your skill set is important to some space company that's out there. And they need you just as much as you want to be in the door. So go after it.
Thanks so much. This has been really inspiring. I'm already quite happy to hear what you said, and I'm sure anybody who's listening and watching this right now has a lot to take away from this. And I would also like to say, if you're watching this episode right now, you may have heard of MaxSpace, but I really do want to tell you, go check out what they're doing. It's really interesting. And since you also mentioned about switching fields, I just published an online course on engineers who want to switch to a field in the space engineering department. It's called Transfer to Space. I'll put the link in the comments below. And Kirsten, I want to thank you a lot for doing this for us, for sharing your experiences with us.
Thanks for having me. It was great.